there too. I ride a motorcycle. Remember that day we was up in Nelsonville and prayed. Did you listen to that day when there rained?
Yeah, that was a day. Yeah,
You was with me.
yeah,
Dave was with me.
yeah.
We all got drowned that day.
Yeah, I have Dexter. You want to hold on? Okay, good evening to our evening class. Tonight we are going to be looking at another of the minor prophets. We've only got a few left, so we're getting close to the end of the Old Testament. We are going to be looking at the book of Zephaniah tonight. Zephaniah, again, one of the minor prophets. Again, as we've been starting off each of these classes with the idea that in some way or other, all of these books fit into a general theme from the very beginning, from Genesis on through Revelation. And that general theme is the glory of God and the salvation of man through Jesus Christ our Lord. And everything centers around that. This morning in our sermon, we talked about again the idea of our need to glorify God, putting God first, give Him thanksgiving, and give Him the praise that He so richly deserves. That's the glory of God. But also it deals with the salvation of man. And again, in that passage we looked at this morning, God is called the God of salvation. Wants man to be saved, did not want man to be lost. Originally wanted man to live forever. But of course, because of sin entered into the world, and because of that sin, death entered the world. And since then, all have been doomed to the condemnation of death and the need for salvation. That is where Jesus comes in. Zephaniah fits into that by showing that God's glorification also involves God's justification. The reason why God is going to punish Jerusalem in particular is because of their lack of giving God the glory that He so richly deserved. And we'll see some of the ways in which they came up severely short in relationship to what God wants them to do. The book is of Zephaniah. The name comes from the main character, the writer of the book, identified as Zephaniah, and it means Jehovah hides, or Jehovah has hidden, or Jehovah has treasure hidden in his heart, a type of situation. It's interesting as we open up Zephaniah chapter 1 and verse 1. Zephaniah has an interesting history. He is the great grandson of Hezekiah. Hezekiah was one of the kings of Judah. Hezekiah was the God. Remember that God came to him and said that he was going to die. He prayed that God might extend his life, and God did extend his life. After Hezekiah returned to his health, he was very ill at that period of time. After he returned to health, some ambassadors came from Babylon, and they were talking to him, and Hezekiah could not stop but having to show the ambassadors from Babylon all the treasures that were in the treasury of King Hezekiah. The Lord was upset with Hezekiah for doing that and asked him, what did they see? And Hezekiah said, they've seen everything. And the Lord said to him that everything that they saw, they're going to take with them. Not immediately. It's going to be 4 generations in the future, but everything they saw is going to end up in Babylon. Well, again, Hezekiah or Zephaniah is a member of the royal family, several generations. He's not like a prince or something of that nature, but he is part of the royal family. And he claims Jerusalem as his home. He calls Jerusalem this place, which would be indicative of the idea of him living in Jerusalem at this period of time. The time of the writing is about the same period of time as Jeremiah, as possibly Habakkuk, the prophet that we looked at last week, also with Nahum, the prophet. Again, there were about 4 prophets about this period of time. This is immediately before the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. This is a very, very important period of time. We see from Jeremiah the indication whenever Jeremiah was preaching about the Lord coming in and punish them, it was a state of disbelief. That God may slap us on the wrist, but He's not going to take us out of the land. Last week we looked at Habakkuk, and Habakkuk is a questioning type of spirit. Why would God allow a terrible, wicked nation to come in and punish God's chosen people? So this is all dealing with that same period of time. We see here that it states that Zephaniah was prophesying during the reign of King Josiah. Now, we have to examine some of the kings. Now, we mentioned Hezekiah, and that one of his descendants, again, is Zephaniah, but also one of his descendants is Josiah. In between Hezekiah and Josiah, there were several very wicked kings of Judah. This was a very terrible scene during the reign of a couple of these kings. They brought into the temple area itself some of these foreign gods. And we'll talk about these foreign gods in just a moment. They brought them right into the temple, and it's hard for us to imagine, but they were declining over the years. By the way, who was the king that introduced these foreign idols into the land in the first place? Anybody know? Think about it.
What?
Huh?
What'd you say?
Who was the king that introduced some of these foreign idols into Israel in the first place?
Jeroboam.
Not Jeroboam. Huh? Not Rehoboam. Solomon. Who said Solomon? Very good. It was Solomon. Remember, what did Solomon do? Married foreign women. Now, these foreign women, when they came to Jerusalem, said, hey, we would like to worship our gods. And Solomon said, well, that'd be a bad thing to do, bringing these gods into Israel, but he allowed it to happen. The interesting thing is, we make sometimes compromises with evil. Well, what was Solomon's compromise? Anybody know?
Just outside of Jerusalem.
Yeah. Okay. You can bring them into Israel, but you can't bring them into Jerusalem. So what we know as the Mount of Olives is where a lot of these idols were set up by these foreign wives of Solomon, and they had to go out of Jerusalem and over to the Mount of Olives in order to worship these gods, but they were present in the land during the time of Solomon. And the only thing is, there's no king that came along to expel them from the area of Jerusalem. And now, by the time we get to some of the descendants here of Hezekiah, Manasseh and Amnon are two of the worst kings of Judah. They are, in many ways, worse than the kings of the northern kingdom, Israel. Why? Because, well, they introduced a couple of idols up in the northern part. That was, again, we mentioned Jeroboam earlier. Jeroboam set up two idols so that the people would not go back to Jerusalem and worship God. But in doing so, he never claimed that they were going to be worshiping a different God, just a different form of the same God. But they were going to do it through these idols. So that was bad enough. And again, as we pointed out, I think last week, that every king of Israel is given the same declaration, that they continued the sin which Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, introduced into Israel, and that was setting up these foreign gods. They never got rid of those foreign gods, or not foreign gods, but the two gods, the two idols that were set up to supposedly be the image of God. All right, now, that was bad enough, but these are foreign gods. And as you read through the text, you're going to find some of these gods that were mentioned that, again, they're idols, and keep that in mind. They are not real gods, but they are worshipped as real gods by at first only foreigners, the foreign wives of Solomon. However, it's sort of like a curiosity type thing. People were curious. Hey, these women are going out here and worshiping these different idols and so on. Maybe we ought to think about doing this too. Some of these gods were really atrocious. The one that is mentioned, Moloch, and in the book of Zephaniah, it's called Milcom, or the other name is Malcolm, Malcam, I think is the King James version rendering of that god. This is a god that, again, not the God. Whoever set up the original worship of this god claimed that their god, Moloch, required the blood of their children. And so they would offer their children upon this sacrificial altar to Moloch. Why would you do that? Well, you had a bad bumper year. Well, what was the problem? Moloch was angry at you guys because you did not offer the proper sacrifice. So give us your children and we'll offer them to Moloch and everything will be better next year. Or maybe we were being attacked by a foreign army, and what's the answer? Well, Moloch requires a child's blood sacrifice in order to keep these people out. So this is a way, this superstitious idea of following these different gods comes about. The Bible, and also even in the New Testament, warns us about practicing actions of sorcery or witchcraft or things of this nature. And yet we see it happening all the time around us. You hear of people who won't go through their day without reading their astrological chart, or some who are going to go to a palm reader. All right. I saw an advertisement the other day. I looked at it, and you just shake your head. How can people be so stupid? But the advertisement dealt with the idea of these California psychics. And they were saying, we've got a bunch of psychics on our staff. Well, how do you go about hiring a psychic? Yeah. What are the qualifications for hiring a psychic? Well, I don't know. Can you read this script that's going to be before you when somebody calls? That's their concept. But people believe this stuff. There are other things, that we need to stay away from, not because there is any power in these things, but it's the idea that it takes us away from God. Ouija board, we've heard of Ouija boards, and people have these little seance and things like this just for the curiosity, just to see what happens. Well, something happens. It might be mysterious to them, but they say, oh, the Ouija board has power, or the Ouija board can actually see the future, or whatever the case might be. It can't. It doesn't. But we get excited about that because that we leave God. This is the way these gods introduce themselves into the lives of people. So God, in essence, says, don't do anything with them. Just, don't make them part of your life. Because when you do, this mysticism will creep into your life. So even the New Testament warns us about this idea of staying away from sorcery and things of this nature. No power, again, in them, but people assume that there is power in these different ideas. Okay, Moloch was one of those gods that were introduced, and now these gods have, by the way, by the time of Ammon and Manasseh, the gods are no longer over on the Mount of Olives. They've migrated. They've moved. Now, they didn't move by themselves, but the people of Judah moved them inside the city of Jerusalem. You see, Solomon took the first step. Well, I'll let them in Israel, but I won't let them in Jerusalem. Well, who's going to keep them out of Jerusalem? Pretty soon we see them now not only in Jerusalem, but in the temple complex itself. And they were being worshipped along with. A lot of these did not eliminate God. These different gods did not eliminate God into people's lives. All it did was say, well, why can't we worship them all? If you worship one God, it gives you powerful things. Why can't we worship two gods? We'll get twice the benefit or twice the blessings. Doesn't work that way, does it? Well, it didn't work this way with the people during the time of Zephaniah. Again, I pointed out Jeremiah talks about the fact that the people, the way they were thinking, said God won't ever punish us. Understand, they still believe in God, but they're just saying God won't punish us, God won't take us out of the land. Habakkuk was talking about the people's response by saying, well, how can God possibly allow a terrible people like the Chaldeans or the Babylonians come in and punish us? Well, God uses nations of the world sometimes to punish what we will identify as a good nation. What is a good nation? A nation that holds God first. Was Judah at this time a good nation? Answer is no. Why? Because they put these other gods right alongside the God of Israel. And so they aren't a good nation. But you say, well, yeah, but at least they weren't as bad as. Well, there we go in this equivocation, this idea, well, as long as we're not super terrible bad, we're okay in the eyes of God. Who said that? Not God. So we got to be careful about equivocating, and we call it we call it thinking for God. We have this idea that I don't think God will do this particular thing. Well, have you read the Bible? Okay. A lot of people making statements about the Bible have never read the Bible, but they've assumed because they think a certain way, God should think the same way. Okay. Well, this totally is against Bible teaching. God's ways are above our ways. His thoughts are above our thoughts. We cannot equivocate what God may or may not do. So here in Zephaniah, we have the attitude of the people that says, God is not involved at all, neither for good nor for evil. Now, what are they saying? What are the people thinking? All right, now, it goes to, again, equivocation. What we assume, right now, their thinking is because of what some of these kings have done. Ammon and Manasseh have done wicked things in the eyes of God. All right, did God strike down Manasseh? No, he didn't do that. Did God, again, because God acts one way under certain occasions, we expect God to act that way under every occasion. Remember the story of whenever David wanted to take the Ark of the Covenant into the city of Jerusalem? What happened? Uzzah was killed. Why was he killed? Well, they put the Ark of the Covenant on an ox cart. All right, and they were traveling down the street. And by the way, there was this big jubilant celebration. David's out front saying, yes, we're going to take the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. And the ox stumbled a little bit. The cart begins shaking. The Ark of the Covenant begins to tip over. You don't want the Ark of the Covenant to fall off, do you? So what do? Uzzah reaches up to steady the Ark of the Covenant, and when he touches it, he dies. Why? Because God said anybody that touches the Ark of the Covenant is going to die. All right? So he died. And David stops the procession and says, whoop, something is wrong. If a person died while we were in the process of doing something good, taking the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, then we're doing something wrong. What's interesting about that is the fact that nobody knew the answer as to what happened. They had to investigate. What do you do to investigate? Read God's word. Maybe you should have done that first. All right, they did. And now they have this death that occurred immediately, by the way. And so now we have this process of, let's go back to the Bible, find out what God says, and then the next time they moved the Ark of the Covenant, they did it the way they were supposed to. And it worked. It was fine. All right, now, come to the time now of Zephaniah. And what are the people saying? Well, when we brought these idols into the city, into the temple, did God strike anybody dead? Was there an earthquake in the city? Did the invading army come in immediately as retribution? No. What happened? What happened? Nothing. Nothing happened. Neither good nor evil. You understand the point now? The idea is God didn't do something whenever these idols are being brought into the temple. Therefore, God doesn't care. Or, remember the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal? It's almost like the idea that the prophets of Baal in return now are saying, hey, where's your God? Is he asleep in heaven? Maybe he's gone off on a vacation someplace. That's the same attitude. The idea is God didn't do anything immediately. And because God didn't do anything immediately, God doesn't care. He's not going to intervene one way or the other. He really doesn't care what we do down here on the earth. But God does care. And by the way, this is what Jeremiah and Nahum and Habakkuk and now Zephaniah are all saying. Just because God hasn't acted up to this point doesn't mean he's not going to. So up until this point, there's always this warning by these different prophets, you better shape up, because if you don't, God is going to do something dramatic. Well, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. In all this period of time, nothing's changed. By the way, you want a good commentary on that, read the book of 2 Peter. What were the people saying? Everything's going on just like it was from the beginning of time. Nothing's changed. God is not concerned about whether or not we are doing things that displeases him. He's just not going to interfere. There's nothing he's going to do. That was again, mistaken attitude. Zephaniah is different from the other prophetic warnings. A lot of the prophetic warnings are aimed at all of Judah. Everybody needs to repent, or the Lord's going to bring destruction. By the time we get to Zephaniah, we see a different approach by Zephaniah. Zephaniah is saying to individuals, don't follow the crowd. Don't think like the rest of the people. The city's gone. Forget it. The Lord's going to destroy Jerusalem. Individually, you have an opportunity to stay with God. And again, a very good warning for us today. Let's not follow the crowd. Yes, things are going downhill in many ways that we don't like. What's my job? Same as always. You be faithful to God. Yes, but everybody else around me is doing this or that or the other. God doesn't care what they're doing. He cares about what we are doing. Are we individually faithful to God? And so that's what God is telling Zephaniah to explain to. We might describe them as the common people, the everyday people. Don't follow the crowd. Don't worship these false gods. God is going to punish Jerusalem. That's already an event that's going to take place. What are you going to do? And so this is more of a personal response. What are you personally going to do about this? Because the majority of people, especially the elite, what we call the elite, here's what becomes interesting about this, because we pointed out Zephaniah is a part of the royal family, but he's not agreeing with the royal family is essentially doing. They're wrong. He knows they're wrong. In this book, he points out, we mentioned, of course, idol worship, but he also points out the criticism God has for many of, again, the more elite people, the judges, the priests. He calls these idolatrous priests. In the King James Version, there is a word, I've got it in here someplace, cherubim, down at the bottom paragraph on page 1. Zephaniah specifically refers to several forms of idolatry that were being practiced in Judah. In the King James Version, the chimarim mentioned in 1:4. In my version, ESV, it calls them idolatrous priests, which is what the term literally means. But I think King James Version might not have recognized at the time it was written what this word meant, and so they just took the Hebrew word and Anglicized it, and that's where we get this Hebrew word. And if you read it, you say, well, what's that? Well, we have come to learn over the years that word means idolatrous priest. Now, what's interesting is they are grouped with the priests of God and also the judges that are in Israel. So now we have three groups of elite people: the judges, or the heads of the people. We have the priesthood, which should be faithful to God, but it was the priesthood that eventually allowed these idols to come into the temple area. And then, not only that, but these idols had their own priesthood, which were allowed also to come in and to worship their God. So this is where this term Chimarim comes in, and it deals with these priests of the idols and their service that they were rendering to these gods while they were in the temple area. So Zephaniah is a warning call to individuals. By the way, Zephaniah uses some analogies here. He is saying, I want you to look around you at what they would identify as the evil nations. Remember, Assyria one time came down during the time of Hezekiah, and they were going to overthrow the city of Jerusalem. But what happened? God turned them back. And the Syrians went back, and they never again ever came down into Jerusalem. In fact, they were now overrun by other invading armies. So the Lord is using that as an example, saying, remember what happened to the Assyrians? First of all, God turned them back, and then God allowed an evil nation to come in and destroy them. Did you get the message? No, they didn't. Because if they got the message and they said, oh, God's punishing these other evil nations, maybe he's going to punish us too. But then we have this attitude again that said, no, God's not going to punish us, or that he doesn't even care what's going on. If he did, then surely he would have done something when these idols were moved into the temple area. So again, interesting background here as we look at this. Interesting question. Again, we no way we can answer. And I want to think about the time that Jesus was overlooking the city of Jerusalem, and the disciples were asking him. First of all, they were going through the temple, remember? And the disciples asked the question, look at these magnificent structures. This was the temple that King Herod had built. King Herod was dead at this period of time, at least the King Herod that started the building of the temple. At this period of time, the time of Jesus, they were putting the final touches on the completion of this beautiful temple. And the disciples are just absolutely amazed. It's like you walking into a grand building. It might be a great cathedral or some marvelous structure. You say, wow, this is just marvelous, just wonderful. But they're also looking at the size of the stones that were in the temple structure. And Jesus made a comment, you think this place is great, but there's a time coming, there's not going to be one stone left upon another. Okay, that caught their attention. Why? Because it wasn't even completed yet. And Jesus is talking about its destruction. That one stone is not going to be left upon another. That caught their attention. Now, they didn't say anything when they were in the city, but as they travel, and again, if you were here Wednesday night, we saw the picture from the Mount of Olives looking down into the city of Jerusalem. That's the picture, and where you saw the Dome of the Rock, the big golden dome in the middle of the picture, that was where the Temple of Solomon stood. So while up on the Mount of Olives, by the way, the same location where they put all these foreign idols, while Jesus is up there, they're looking down into the city. And that sparked their attention again, because you can now see this magnificent temple from the Mount of Olives. And they asked Jesus, well, that's a very interesting concept you mentioned. When's this going to happen? What's going to be the end of the world and the end of the age, and so on and so on? Well, there were several questions in there, and the Lord was breaking it down. But the first thing he told them was, in essence, that the city was going to be invaded. The city was going to be destroyed. And whenever you see it coming, you better get out. Go into the hills of Judea. Now, that's not the end of the world. Why? Where would you go if it's the end of the world? This is not like a cartoon picture. You see maybe maybe a series of columns at beginning falling, and you have this superhero jumping from one column to the other as it begins to collapse on you. Where are you going to go if the entire world is collapsing on you? There's no place to go. So Jesus is telling them, warning them, that whenever you see this event that he's talking about coming, and you'll have some warning signs, get out of the city. Now, what's interesting, the early writers gave us some information. It says that as far as they know, there was not a single Christian that perished during the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. Why? They listened to what God said. They got out of Jerusalem. Interesting, right? Well, that's the warning that the Lord was giving to them about this destruction of Jerusalem. We have the same type of warning given by Jeremiah and others. Possibly that's what Zephaniah is saying. These brilliant scholars that are going to remain in Jerusalem, they're going to be carried off into Babylonian captivity. You guys that are faithful to God, get out. Get out. Now, did anybody take warning to that? I don't know. But if that's the warning. The warning here in Zephaniah is not aimed at the elite or anybody else. It's aimed at the common people. If you still believe God, if you trust God, then you're going to have to understand Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. It doesn't end on a sad note, though. The last verse in Zephaniah talks about the fact that there is going to be a return. Jerusalem is done. People are going to be in captivity, but that's not the end. The Lord is still in control. And they might be thinking about the statement made by Isaiah and Jeremiah at the time that God is going to save a remnant of the people. Maybe people that Zephaniah is trying to reach might be considered part of that remnant of people. I don't know, but interesting to think about. All right. Thoughts, comments, questions on any of that? All right. Thank you for your attention this evening. Lee has our song. Okay. Lee, if you would go ahead and lead a song, and then we will. 389.
And before that, we'll take 378, 2 verses.
All right, 378, we're going to sing first, a couple of verses there. Okay, and then I will give a message after we sing this song, again relating to Zephaniah.
Just a few more days to be filled with praise and to tell the old story. Then when twilight falls and my Savior calls, I shall go to Him in glory. I'll exchange my cross for a starry crown, where the gates swing outward ever, and His feet I'll lay every burden down, and with Jesus reign forever. What a joy will be when I wake to see Him for whom my heart is burning. Never more to stop, never more to die, for that day my heart is yearning. I'll exchange my cross for a starry crown, where the gates swing outward ever, and His feet I'll lay every burden down, and with Jesus reign forever.
I want to give one closing thought from the book of Zephaniah, the 3rd chapter. Again, it's pretty much doom and gloom for Judah and especially Jerusalem up until the end of the 3rd chapter. But in the 3rd chapter, again, we see this mercy of God, that God does not want to destroy. God wants to save people. In verse 17, it starts out, the Lord your God is in your midst, a mighty one who will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will quiet you by his love. He will exalt you over you with loud singing. I will gather those of you who mourn for the festival, so that you will no longer suffer reproach. Behold, at that time, I will deal with your oppressors, and I will save the lame and gather the outcast, and I will change their shame into praise and renown in all the earth. Again, this is an ending, as I didn't quote verse 20 there, which is the final thought, that there was going to be a return of these people when they're carried away. But notice in this, the idea of, first of all, God being a God who wants to save. A God who is going to punish their oppressors. Who will be their oppressors? The Babylonians. God's going to take care of them. And we know that God did that because he allowed the Medes and the Persians to conquer the Babylonians. And it was the Medes and the Persians who allowed Judah, or the people of Judah, to return back to Judah at that period of time. So again, this is the mercy of God, even behind his judgment. Again, it's like a father correcting his child. Yes, the correction is during the time of correction, neither the parent nor the child appreciates the judgment, the punishment that is going on at that period of time. But afterwards, when it was done, again, there is this extension of mercy and love that we, again, might come together again. And God is offering that to the people, but it's they who have to change, because God did not change. God never changes. It's we who leave God and not God who leaves us. If you're not a child of God, if we can help you make a decision to do that this evening, we encourage you to come forward as we stand and sing this invitation song.
To live for Jesus and be always pure and good. Would you walk with him within the narrow road? Would you hand and serve your servant and carry all your load? Let him have his way with thee. His heart can make you what you ought to be. His blood can cleanse your heart and make you free. His love can fill your soul and you will see 'twas best for him to have his way with thee. Would you have him make you free, follow at his call? Would you know the peace that comes by giving all? Would you have him save you so that you need never fall? Let him have his way with thee. His blood can make you what you ought to be. His blood can cleanse your heart and make you free. His love can fill your soul and you will see 'twas best for him to have his way with thee. Would you in his kingdom find a place of constant rest? Would you prove him true each providential test? Would you in his service labor always at your best? Let him have his way with thee. His heart can make you what you ought to be. His blood can cleanse your heart and make you free. His love can fill your soul and you will see 'twas best for him to have his way with thee.
Good evening, everybody. It's certainly good to have you all with us. If you've not yet had an opportunity to pick up a copy of the bulletin, please do so. A lot of names in there that we need to be remembering in our prayer life. We've got the note here about Karen. Do we have any updates on her by chance?
All I know is she's supposed to be out of the hospital
Tomorrow.
tomorrow.
For those that weren't here, Karen Brooks has been readmitted into the hospital. She's got pneumonia again, or maybe she never got rid of it to begin with.
Additional pneumonia is what Barb said.
Okay. Either way, they're doing more aggressive treatment, and she appears to be improving at this time. So we just need to continue and pray for her. And no matter what, it sounds like she's got a long road ahead of her. Anything else?
Just remember, please sign the card for Taylor's grandma, and her address as well as Tammy Wary's is on the bulletin board. So
Okay.
if you want to send cards to the two families.
Anything else? Is there anyone needs to partake of the Lord's Supper? All right, Joe, you be in charge of that.
We'll just do it here. We'll let it back here.
Okay.
Head on to
All right. Michael, you dismiss us in prayer.
Dear God, we thank you for another day you blessed us all with, a day that we've been able to come together and to worship you and to fellowship with one another. We just thank you for all of our many, many blessings and how that we can so easily take for granted all the freedoms which we have in this country to be able to come together to worship you and to be together and not have to worry and hide in fear. Please be with the many names that were mentioned and the families. Just please place your healing hand upon them and comfort those that need comforting. Please be with us. Help us to set an example to the world and show them that there can be life without all the turmoil. And just please look over us, keep us safe, so we can come back and worship you again. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.